So who do you think would be interested in reading your book?
I hope just about anybody who's in work, whether you're with a public enterprise, large enterprise, or small enterprise. It's not a learned tome. It's written in a very accessible style, at least people are kind enough to say so. Certainly it was my intention. There's a mixture of fact and research and hopefully innovative way of looking at some of these problems. But also a lot of first-person stuff, anecdotes and stories from my own personal experience, which give it a readable character. So it's something that is just pretty much anybody could pick up and read. Other people, are seriously interested in some of the contents, and so if you're actually a director of strategy of an enterprise, it might be quite interesting to you as well, or a CEO of the management team, and indeed boards of directors. But that's really how I pitch this book.
And presumably, people that have been in big businesses for a long time will be on the back foot with this. They need to make a plan. They need to help drive a business forward.
Yeah, and I think I think that sort of moves on really to the content of the book. The title is Disruption Denial, how companies are ignoring the disruptive threats that are staring them in the face.
It sounds a bit harsh, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's meant to be provocative, but it's that is what the book is about. First of all, the first part of the book deals with disruption itself. The second part of the book about denial and explore what that means. And the third part of the book is the more around the moving beyond denial into survival and growth if you're an established business. And but the disruption is where we start, and it's really a synthesis of the various forces of disruption. Starting with the disruptive new competitors like you, Rich, who have come into the game from nowhere, which many enterprises are unable to respond to, and which are able to develop new value networks and new ways of doing businesses that established players are unable to respond to. We look at big data in a big way, and how the combination of that, the availability of data, growing exponentially, and as we sit here talking, growing exponentially, and vast amounts of data are captured by all kinds of sensors inside the body and under the roads and in the weather, everywhere. But the combination of that plus the cloud as a storage facility, plus mobility, plus massive capability to handle data, treat data, compute data, all those things have suddenly revolutionized the way organizations can, of all types, can react to circumstances. And then the whole algorithms and artificial intelligence. Think about robots and what they might do to replace the enterprise. So those issues are developed in quite some detail in one chapter. Then I look quite a lot at what I call the generational tribes. In your business, you must be very much into millennials and post-millennials and so on, and explore exactly how these people think and how they react, and how pushing stuff to them is not the way it works these days. The way they interact with their friends, known and unknown, through social media, and how they develop relationships and take advice and give advice, and how the ecosystems work, are things that organizations have got to take cognizance of. And then I look at the disruptive forces of business models. I alluded to that before, about legacy systems have been, the whole way that the business model and the cost model of the enterprise works has been inherited from generations. And whilst it's not all bad news, there are challenges of how that business model can respond to a new world. Look at the organizational stuff I was alluding to earlier on, and this is very important, how the pyramidical organization, particularly within public quoted companies, is really incapable of responding to circumstances and the difficulties that are inherent in that.
So do you think that they need to be putting more money into what's happening at the coalface with their business and feeding that upwards.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the reality is that pyramids, the organization as a machine, which is basically how it works. People in the center develop plans and budgets and pull levers, and people at the bottom are meant to then implement what somebody at the top has described, is a totally wasteful model in terms of wasteful in the sense that the practitioners, the people at the coalface, the people who actually do the work, they are the people who actually know what's going on and are in touch with their competitors and know what they need. Those people are frustrated, and it's wasteful. And yes, I think there is a big need for a new type of organizational model. And I talk about that elsewhere in the book, but some very interesting work done by Frederic Laloux about reinventing organizations and looking at successful organizations around the world that have completely reinvented the organization with non-hierarchical systems, with different ways of doing things and different approaches. And people need to be aware of the possibilities.
So you've been in business a long time now. I don't think you'll
No.
mind me saying.
No.
The speed of change, would you say it's significant now? I mean, there's always been disruptive. You know, a competitor comes along and upsets you by replicating what you're doing and doing it a little bit better and a little bit smaller, so they can move a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
That's not how it is now.
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
is it
you're right.
faster now than ever before?
Yeah, I mean, I think you did right. People, the idea of disruption goes right back over 100 years, or nearly 100 years, to Schumpeter, who started talking about it so long ago. But so disruptive forces have always been there. And you're right to point out the difference between what I call incremental innovation and disruptive innovation. The way established enterprises have existed has been, as you say, to add products and services and to react to circumstances within their existing business value chain and model. And they're very good at that. Our good R&D departments and new product development departments thrive on that. But as Clayton Christensen at Harvard Business School pointed out now 20 years ago, and a huge influence on the Silicon Valley fraternity and the big startups that have disrupted our world, there's something around established enterprises unable really to deal with fundamental innovation, the fundamental threat that comes to them. And that leads on really to the second part of the book, which is, having explored these different forces of disruption, some of which I've alluded to, I explore and examine this whole phenomenon of denial. Now, as you say, it's a bit provocative in the title. Very few people I've met actually deny any of the forces I challenge them with, the existence of them. So denial is not denial of the fact, it's denial of the importance, the immediacy, the need to do something about it, and the pace of that, and the fundamental nature, and the fact, the disruptive threat that it means to the very existence of the enterprise in many cases. And in this part of the book, I look at a number of things, but the first is the whole process of what is denial, the whole analysis of what it is in established enterprises, where denial seems to be pretty much the default setting for people confronted by disruptive threat, how the brain works.
It's almost panic to some degree, isn't it? Would
Well,
you say that
panic can be, I think panic is certainly some cases there. But most, what I think is interesting is how the brain works. And I did a little bit of examination of the neurological science behind how it works and how the brain works. And if you're wanting people to be productive, they need to not be, for example, they need to work in an environment where they don't have stress. If you want to ask people to be innovative, you've got to give them focus. If you want to use the cognitive capacity of the brain, you have to create an environment where that cognitive function can work. And then there are all the biases that exist in organizations, which are biases towards conformity and to relationships and so on and so forth. So I explore all that stuff, very interesting things. So it's not kind of surprising that denial exists if you look at the very nature of how the brain exists and who the people tend to be inside organizations. So having looked at why denial is kind of not surprising in established organizations and traditional industries, I then look at the compounding phenomenon, if you like, which is the inbreeding syndrome. How it is that people who are in leadership positions in organizations all tend to come pretty much from the same mold. They've been to the same school, have the same education, have pretty much the same career path, and so on and so forth. And as we know well, if you want to disrupt something, you need what I call productive disruptors, people who are able to think differently.
Upset the apple cart a bit.
Yeah, well, yeah. You need to change the DNA. You enrich the DNA. You can't really do that if you keep on having the same people being hired to do the same job and the same perspectives.
Done the same degrees and the same.
Yeah, and there's a lot of research I go on to discuss that. And then the other element in denial is what you were alluding to, which is what I call the stuckness predicament. Sounds a big word, but actually people, in executive teams, feel stuck. Their freedom of action to do much about any of this, they seem as being pretty limited. They have a pretty short life expectancy to run the organisation. The average is between 4 and 5 years at the top. They are judged on short-term performance in most cases, and they've got obligations and rewards which condition how they work, and they look at the way they make investments in a way that is not encouraging taking a risk over long-term perspectives and so on and so forth. And I go into that in quite some detail. And so that's, if you like, the second part of the book, which is the denial part. So we have looked at disruption, what they are, and why it is they're an organisation, and then I go on to the third part of the book.
So tough times then, David. How are big companies going to go about turning the corner and keeping up with the smaller, more nimble companies, and hopefully not doing a Nokia or a Blockbuster over the next few years?
Yeah. Well, I hope the book actually doesn't end on a depressing note. It doesn't at all. It's actually it's a book with I hope some optimism in the back end of it. And the third part of the book explores what it takes for people in these kind of predicaments that have been described, disruptive threats and so on, to get from a state of denial to a state of acceptance. Now that sounds easy, but and I trace a number of things that you can and must be done to go from not just intellectual acceptance, but a commitment to get cracking, to transform themselves. Because without doing that, Darwinism will take over, and there, in many cases, there won't be a long-term sustainable future. Then talk about the need to transform the business model of the enterprise away from the classic historical kind of pipe view of the world. That's pushing stuff down pipes to customers and selling it to them, but actually to be a platform model. There's also work has been done there by Sangeet Chowdhury and people like that. But it's really around making your legacy systems opened up to the kind of platforms in which these new generations of consumers play. Not junking your legacy, but enabling it to become a player in that kind of world. So those two things are the sine qua non for success: acceptance and new platform. And then there are a number of things that you can and must do. One is you could, if you like, make fairly fundamental changes. And I trace the story, I call it the big move. I trace the story of Dell as an example, a company that was itself a disruptive innovator when it started life, and went through a number of chapters of its life. And the way that they managed to reinvent themselves, and the future is, the jury's out as to how successful they're going to be. But the sine qua non for them was to be bought by a big private equity company and remodeled around a completely different view of the world. So that's one thing you could do, but not everybody can do
I
that.
suppose that's more of the traditional method of M&As. Just buy up your competitors, just buy up the plucky upstart and shut them down. But if you look at the way that Facebook and Google go about it now, they do it to bolt on. But the problem with these things, I suppose, is the amount that companies are valued at now. It's surely making that less of an option, wouldn't you say?
Well, that's certainly, the valuation is certainly an issue. But if you're an established enterprise in a traditional industry, you can make acquisitions, clearly. But I think history has shown that if you try to make an acquisition and integrate it into your established business model, the success rate is pretty miserable. So later in this part of the book, I talk about disrupt yourself opportunities, including making acquisitions and indeed making disposals and acquisitions, but keeping those businesses completely separate with a different type of organizational model, a different way of organizing, and a different DNA, if you like. If you try to integrate them, then the mother will smother the baby. That can't happen. But yes, acquisitions are there, are ways. But private equity can be a useful route for some companies to get out of the thrall, get out of their stuckness, and reinvent themselves without having the responsibilities of reporting to stock markets and all constraints that represents, to buy themselves time to reinvent themselves. There are things that can be done, as I say, about disrupting yourself, lots of different measures. They can reinvent what I call a digital age disruptive organization. What does that look like? You can completely different ways of setting yourselves up, even from a new constitution to a new way of setting yourself up in terms of lack of hierarchy and different types of systems and so on, and that's explored in some detail. And then we look at other measures that can be bolted on to how an organization functions in terms of the way that people interact on a day-to-day basis, new skills that can be learned. And then I talk about what this digital age leadership looks like, a completely different type of leader than one that necessarily we have known in the past. So that gives you a flavour of where it is. So the intention is that it ends up on an optimistic note, but there's no doubt it's going to be pretty challenging.
Very good. Thank you very much.